All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the show. Today we have Dan Lofgren, who is the founder of Cowboy Partners. He's been fully engaged in the multifamily industry since 1978 and founded the company along with its sister company, Cowboy Properties, in 2001. He is acknowledged in the industry as a pioneer in development of mixed income communities and mission-driven affordable housing as an innovator in a multifamily space. Included in a long list of awards and industry recognition, Dan is the recipient of the 2018 Envision Utah Common Good Award, the 2017 NAIOP Developer of the Year in Utah, and the Utah Apartment Association Lifetime Achievement Award. So with that, welcome in, Dan.
Hi, Chase.
Glad to have you in.
Thank you.
This is great.
Flattered to have been invited.
Of course. Mentioned before we started recording, I've heard incredible things and seen incredible things across the community with Cowboy Partners in my various roles here across the valley and toward a couple of your properties. And so you really are, I'd say, a pillar to the development community here. And again, it's awesome to have you in. So thank you.
Well, I'll work really hard to live up to that. Thank you.
You
That's
will.
Very nice of you to say.
Of course. Well, the first thing I typically like to ask my guests, Dan, is to talk a little bit about your upbringing. So knowing who you are and what you've accomplished
Sure.
today, are there any things you could tell us about your upbringing that led to who you are?
You know, Chase, as a kid, I don't know if ideal's the right word, but I had a pretty great life. I grew up in the East Mill Creek area. We weren't affluent by any stretch, right? But we'd spend all summer long in the creek. There was a group of neighborhood kids of 6 or 7 of us, and a lot of freedom. It was in an age when there was no discomfort. There's no anxiety about letting your kids roam loose, right? So
Right.
Anywhere you could reach on a 10-speed Schwinn, that was our range, right? And, a lot of freedom that we enjoyed. Incredibly impactful family, parents were big influence in each in different ways. But I don't know that I can say there was any sort of milestone event in my youth, nearly so much as I was always supported. I was always, very nurturing mother. That doesn't mean permissive. I had to eat my broccoli, right?
Sure.
But very nurturing and encouraging me to try, encouraging me to reach out and try new things.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. And going into your high school and college years, did you have any experiences that, triggered any sort of entrepreneurial itch or bug within you, or saw that from others around you, or was it kind of natural evolution?
No, I will confess the entrepreneurial piece, the entrepreneurial side of my endeavors didn't emerge till much later. There were some experiences in college that guided my pursuits, but well-intentioned and well-considered as those were, they were rerouted by an opportunity that came with a company by the name of Prowswood, which was a large, really highly respected development organization responsible for really popularizing the condominium development concept along, here in the Mountain States. Dick Prowse and Bob Wood, really huge influence in my professional career. But I had a chance to go to work for them shortly after I had started my career in advertising, which is what I studied at the U. Believe it or not, at the time they gave a degree in advertising. And I had this opportunity to go to work for Dick and Bob. And the reason that opportunity arose is I had worked for them part-time while I was going to school. But I couldn't resist the opportunity. They were people I had admired greatly. And there was a bit of a connection. The things that were important to me seemed to click with them, right? Not that they were all that concerned about this youngster they had just hired, but there seemed to be there's some sort of a connection there that made it really comfortable place for me to go to work.
Yeah, it's always good to have those initial mentors
Right.
and those who care.
Yeah.
And were you initially doing advertising work for them, or was it real estate work?
No, I graduated and went to work for a small ad agency here in Salt Lake. We only had three meaningful clients, but they happened to be Paramount Pictures, United Artists, and Disney Studios.
Yeah.
We did placement and promotion for movies. It was fun. It was pretty glamorous, right? I mean, being the guy in charge of Disney Studios releases here and stuff, it was pretty cool. But I didn't see that was a long-term trajectory for me. So when the opportunity came to work for Dick and Bob, I actually went to work in the marketing department, not doing advertising, but in sales, the condominium business. They were very busy in the condominium business in the 70s and 80s. A great run of success, and I learned a lot during that period of time. But by 1987, I had, without commenting on all the stops along the way, by 1987, I had become president of the company and a partner with Bob and Dick.
Okay.
And that was a pretty cool opportunity, right?
Right.
By 1997, Bob and Dick had in mind that they had sort of reached a point in their career. They were ready to, I use the expression, they were ready to leave the casino. Show me where the cashier's cage is. I'm ready to go.
Right.
And I'm, on the back row saying, well, hold on, wait a minute. I still want to do stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, the outcome of that was we sold the company to a large Boston organization we had done some business with, Boston Financial. Great partners. We operated Prowswood as a subsidiary of Boston Financial. And interestingly enough, 2 years later, Boston Financial was sold to an Australian company by the name of Lend Lease.
Got it.
An unusual name, but large, enormous organization by comparison to what we were at the time. And we operated Prowswood as a subsidiary of Lend Lease for 2 years. And that takes you up to 2001 when we started Cowboy Partners.
Got it. So it sounds like condos was the main business line for Prowswood. Am I saying that?
Prowse, P-R-O-W-S,
Prowse.
Prowswood.
Okay,
The
Prowswood.
combination of those two men's names.
Yep.
Condos were a big deal, but they began into the multifamily business in the late 70s and through the 80s as an outlet for the yield on the condo business. The returns on the condo business were being invested into apartment communities.
Okay. Got it. And was that I guess profit from the partners that was being rolled into the apartments, or were they raising capital outside of the profits from the?
No, there was there was a little bit of third party capital, but for the most part, it was Bob and Dick and their personal resources.
Yeah, so they were able to kind of snowball over the years what they'd built.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
And what was your role? I mean, ultimately became president of the company, but as you started and evolved, how did your role and your responsibilities within the business evolve over time?
Well, I started in a condo sales position, eventually took over as the marketing director, and then added property management to that portfolio, and then was offered the opportunity to become president of the company. A few years later, Bob and Dick allowed me to take a partnership position with them. So it was the three of us that ended up selling to Boston Financial.
Got it. And what was I'm just curious, like the age difference when you came in initially for the partners, what was the age difference and how was that dynamic as you rose to partner?
35 years.
Okay.
I had never thought of that question.
Good gap.
But, I was in my early 20s and they were probably in their late 50s.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, it's a good lesson for, I think, for people coming into the industry is if you can pair yourself with, those who are more senior, one for learning, but two for potential opportunities to grow within in the space, and as they get closer to retirement, potential opportunities for
and
partnership.
As I spent time as part of that Prowswood team, I started to really grasp what it was about Bob and Dick that made me want to work for them, that's where I wanted to go, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't about the role that they offered me. It wasn't a very glamorous thing. It was the opportunity to work with them. These are men of extraordinary integrity. You'll never meet two more different people in your life than Dick and Bob, but there were circumstances that arose, and if you remember the mid-'80s, you won't remember the mid-'80s because you weren't born, but you maybe have read stories about the mid-'80s were pretty tough on the real estate business. The Tax Reform Act and all the impacts of that, and what happened with the savings and loans, and there were some circumstances that were incredibly tough, incredibly demanding. And others in our business, some names you would recognize, very respected people, walked away from their obligations, not out of default, but because the circumstances made it possible for them to do that. Bob and Dick hung in there and took their commitments very solemnly, and it cost the two of them a bunch of dough. Mm-hmm. But what a lesson for me to watch and see them stand up to their obligations.
Yeah.
Because it was just unthinkable that they wouldn't. It was just not interested in the conversation about not doing it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's great.
And really powerful lessons from those two men.
Yeah, sounds like great mentorship opportunity.
Yeah, very cool.
So you started there in the 70s,
right?
And then it was late 90s that the business was sold. Sounds like you stayed on for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. I did want to ask, Dan, not a lot of real estate ventures are sold. Typically, you have some principles, and it's more of a lifestyle business, or it just gets passed down to generation. But what was that process like, and why did this financial firm come in and buy?
Boston Financial's primary line of business was they were a tax credit syndicator.
Okay.
They were buying up affordable housing deals, and by that time, we had developed some affordable housing expertise. We became involved with a company from Atlanta by the name of Flournoy. We did some joint ventures with Flournoy and tax credits in the late 80s. You may recall that the LIHTC became a thing in 86, 87. And we did our first projects in 87 with Flournoy, and we had developed some expertise. And so Boston Financial acquired Prowswood as deal flow. Mm. We had the ability to develop and deliver the product for which they were soliciting investment from institutions. And as you know, the tax credit laws encourage corporate investing, not individual investing in those tax credits. And so working through Boston Financial was a great outlet for us, right? It was a source of capital for what we wanted to do, and we were a source of deals for them. So it was ostensibly, it was perfect.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, when you break it down like that, it makes a lot of sense why they would want to acquire that pipeline.
Yeah. And then, as I say, 2 years later, Boston Financial was sold to Lend Lease. Lend Lease was an Australian company with an unusual portfolio. They were in the engineering and insurance business. And how those two came together is a long, long story. But they had started developing really large-scale projects. And they came to the U.S. looking for opportunity, and they acquired, in the course of growing Lend Lease in the U.S., they acquired Boston Financial, and we were a subsidiary of Boston Financial, so we became part of Lend Lease.
Sure.
Well, Lend Lease, we were a tiny dot on their balance sheet, and they had no interest in the markets in which we were active at the time. They were looking for international markets, 24-hour markets. In the U.S., there's San Francisco, there's New York, not a lot more. They weren't very interested in the deals we were doing in San Diego or in Utah.
Sure.
And they began unwinding what was Prowswood, not out of spite or malevolence. It was just trying to help us conform to their business model. And my next assignment was Singapore. I was going to go to Asia and lead the Lend Lease residential in Asia. Hold on, that's not what I want to do. I'd spent a long time building Prowswood as a business, and we had some pretty cool things going on. And so I went to Lend Lease and said, can I buy back Prowswood? And they couldn't have been better about it. I mean, they were so cool. They were just awesome people. And we worked out a deal, and we bought back Prowswood and the controlling interest in a small handful of properties that became the core of our business at that point. And that was in 2001. That was in June of 2001 we closed that.
And I like to get into the details a little bit here. So when you say you bought back Prowswood, I guess, did you have a liquidity event when Boston Financial initially acquired the company,
yes,
such that you had the wherewithal to say, hey, I'm going to write a check and buy this back?
A couple of years later.
Yeah. Okay. So you didn't have to raise capital. You didn't have to go out and get investors to bring it back into the fold.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And what we bought back was the operating company and those partnership interests, controlling partnership interests in those assets. It was curious. They wouldn't sell me the name Prowswood back.
Got it.
It was an interesting conversation. Won't be interesting to anybody else, so I won't bore you with it. But so we were in the market for a new name, and that's when we became Cowboy Partners.
Cowboy Partners.
Yeah.
And it's a awesome name. It's very recognizable. Was there anything behind that?
No, Chase. It's not an awesome. It's awesome now because I think it is because of what it means, what it stands for, right? But remember, I got a degree in advertising. I should have known better than this. It's a horrible name in most in branding terms, right? It says nothing about what we do. Has no geographic indicators, well, except for the Western U.S., which is what we were after, right?
Sure.
It sounds to some people a little bit, is trivial the right word? It sounds a little bit, what? Right? I remember for the first few years when we'd talk to somebody for the first time and talk about Cowboy Partners, they go, oh, okay. It was, nobody was ever really outright rude about it. It was like, really? That's your name? But it had some meaning for us. There was a sort of a cycle of events that gave it some meaning for us. And it was something we had fun with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you probably recognize if you go to New York, and you've spent time with some large institutions, you go to New York, the term cowboy is a term of derision. If I'm at a New York bank, and I hear the term cowboy, it's usually in the context of a sentence, something like, there's no way in the world I'm going to loan any money to those cowboys. Referring to people who shoot from the hip, who are unpredictable, right? And so a little tongue-in-cheek. We had a little bit of fun with it.
Yeah, sure.
But it's now come to mean something to us.
Yeah.
And people understand it. And the only real branding attribute is it's not confused with anyone else.
Sure.
Right? It's pretty distinctive.
Yeah, so. That's great. Well, as any entrepreneur knows, it's really hard to name things, and especially from scratch, because nowadays everything's been used 100 times, and there's only so many iterations of stone and tree and rock and a color to make a name for a real estate fund, or firm. So Cowboy Partners is born 2001.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you acquired, I guess it technically wasn't the name, but it was some interest in some properties. Did any employees come with you at that time? Was it just you?
No. So all but 2 of the employees at Prowswood at that time came with us.
And how many was that?
And I have to give them just so much credit, right? Because, well, hold on. This is a brand new thing, and we're leaving the security of Lend Lease. Now, if I want to stay with Lend Lease, probably going to have to move somewhere else. But they've guaranteed me a job. But they decided to come with us. And I don't know, it was 15 people, something like that. There were 2 people who had very specific reasons that it didn't work for them, and more power to them. They've gone on to be successful in other careers, and that's awesome. But there was this group of folks who came with us. They had some belief in what we were doing and what we were trying to do. And, we shortly after we acquired Prowswood back, we did our first little syndication. Some people who were real close to us in the company put together some capital, and we acquired another small portfolio of the assets we had developed back from Lend Lease.
Okay.
And that was very early on in the Cowboy era. We had a business plan that was pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We knew we didn't have aspirations of being global, galactic. We knew where we wanted to be, what we wanted to do. And, it's now 23 years later, 23 years later. And we're still kind of grinding away on that same business model.
Yeah. So going back to Prowswood, it sounds like most of the multifamily that you were doing was it affordable or market rate or mix of both?
Most of the multifamily we were doing with Prowswood was market rate.
Okay.
But we had dipped our toe in the water in affordable housing.
Okay.
And it's a community by the name of Bridgeside Landing that we did in that period before the Lend Lease era that was pioneering in terms of mixed income development. Mm-hmm. Hard to do. Lenders didn't like the idea. Tax credit investors didn't like the idea. But it's proved up. It's a remarkable asset. Has been for a very long time.
Maybe, Dan, could you explain briefly the difference between market rate and affordable housing for those who don't have any idea?
Sure. Market rate, I think, is pretty self-evident, right? You build a community and offer apartments for rent at whatever the market will pay you for them. Whatever the generally the level of affordability of those is a function of size, location, amenities, the package you put together and you offer to the market. Affordable housing, and I'm going to distinguish with a capital A, right? It's affordable housing in Cowboy terms refers to income restricted housing. We make a bargain that in return for whether it's tax credits or other resources that flow into the transaction, we're going to restrict the rents to households earning 30, 40, 50, 60% of the area median income. So there's a bargain. Tax credits are the primary tool for affordable, the way I'm defining affordable housing. And the bargain's with the IRS. It's, all right, if you guys agree to provide housing at prices that these households can afford being defined by 30% of their household income, that these households can afford, we'll give you these tax breaks. We'll give you these tax advantages. And those tax advantages allow us to raise equity from tax credit investors that effectively buys down the cost of creating that housing. So the proposition is IRS gives me capital, not directly, but indirectly. But in return for that capital, I agree to keep the rents low. And it's a win-win, right? The low-income housing tax credit program, Section 42, I don't think there's any question it's the most significant affordable housing initiative that's ever been undertaken, right, in the United States. So, but there are other ways that affordable housing gets created. It's not just tax credits, but that's the big one.
Yeah, that's a great breakdown, Dan.
Yeah.
And for you at Cowboy, over the last 20 years or so, how much of your product has been market versus affordable? Half and half?
Yeah.
Okay.
And not because we set a lines that we're going to have. That's how it's evolved. We've got a pretty strong commitment to affordable housing. We like it for a lot of reasons, but there are opportunities in market rate housing as well that we pursue for obvious reasons. And mixed income housing is a thing for us. We still do a lot of mixed income housing where, for example, 3 or 4 recent developments that we've done, 20% of the units are set aside for households at 50% of area median income. And we've been able to do that without the benefit of tax credits. Tax credits it's a very long and competitive process. Not that we're afraid of that. We still compete in that world, but can kind of slow you down. The timing is very prescribed. Can kind of slow you down. So we've pursued other strategies to create tranches of affordability in a lot of the projects that we've done.
Yeah. And when you find a site that's viable, what drives the decision between affordable versus market? I know in a lot of instances it's jurisdiction driven or county or city that says, hey, we'll only approve this rezoning or this project if it's affordable, or there's 30% of the project's affordable. I guess, how do you think about that?
I think, Chase, that it starts with a bit of a bias toward affordable. That is, can we do affordable here? There are times when opportunities emerge that, try as hard as we might, we can't make the economics work to make affordable housing a part of the mix. Mm-hmm. You know, we recently completed Liberty Sky downtown on State Street, a high-rise community. We're very proud. It was a lot of fun. We couldn't figure out how to make that affordable. We couldn't figure out how to weave the affordability into that project. So it's all market rate. But other other fairly recent developments like Liberty Boulevard, 20% of the units at Liberty Boulevard are set aside for households at 50% of area median income. That was done without tax credits. It's really cool. A lot of entities have to buy into that vision, right? Your lender has to buy in, the municipality, the housing trust fund, Olin Walker loan fund. You probably recognize some of those names. Mm-hmm. They're all in the mix there. It can become pretty complicated at times, trying to aggregate those resources to make the affordability possible. But how cool is that?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's a great way to provide that housing opportunity, especially a newer product. You're a developer, and so you're able to provide brand new, really great product to those who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it.
And those affordable housing units in a project like Liberty Boulevard or some of the others, they're invisible. By that I mean they're just mixed throughout the community. There's no that's where the low income people live. There's none of that. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, it's great. So going back to 2001, you mentioned you bought back initially some of those properties that were part of the acquisition, and then you bought another portfolio. Yeah. I guess how did it go from there? I mean, how did you go from you got back the business, you started Cowboy to where you are today? Would love to hear how you scaled and
there were some lessons in the Prowswood era that helped shape the business plan for Cowboy Partners. And one of those, our proposition to the market, Chase, is a little bit unique in that we are, for the most part, long-term hold. So imagine you're an investor and we're having a conversation about you putting dough into one of our deals. My proposition to you is something like this. Give me your investment, give me your capital. I'll use it to develop this community. You may never get that capital back, not because it's lost, but because we're going to hold the property for an indefinite period of time. But what you're going to get in return is a very resilient, very competitive cash flow. We're going to give you regular, recurring cash flow out of the project. That's what drives our structure. It doesn't mean that there's never a time to sell. Of course, there's a time to sell everything, right? And sometimes circumstances dictate that, like a few years ago when cap rates were
right
at 3,
Yeah.
right? How can you not,
yeah
right? It'd be irresponsible at some level, right? But our proposition is that it's a long-term hold. And we knew that going in. That's who we wanted to be. And we knew that wasn't the investment du jour. That wasn't what the world was doing. And it wasn't that we were contrarian. It wasn't like, well, the world's doing that, so we want to do this. That wasn't what was on our mind. What was on our mind was some of the lessons we learned about the power of that long-term hold and what it means in terms of the yield and the benefits to an investor. And so we set out with this idea of real estate first. Let's do really good real estate because we're going to own it for a really long time. And if we take care of the real estate and we take care of the people in the real estate, the yield will take care of itself. And that doesn't mean we turn a blind eye to yield. It doesn't mean we ignore it, right? It means we've established what the priorities are. And so far, that's proved to be a workable model. It's proved accurate.
That's amazing. I think that's spot on. And it is unique where a lot of developers are what the term is merchant builders, right?
Yeah,
and
sure.
It's a 3-year project. They build it, they lease it up, and then they sell it because usually, or a lot of times their capital is private equity or they have short terms or it's a closed-end fund vehicle. So I do think that's unique. And I do think, though, it is more common in Utah than a lot of other places. I think there's other groups here that have a similar model, and it's worked very well for people to do that.
You know, we don't claim any special brilliance. I mean, the people doing the merchant build deal, smart guys, you know, making marvelous profits for their investor partners, doing great things in the community, helping build the community, right? We're not professing to be better. We have a little different proposition.
Now, are you investing out of a fund vehicle or is it deal by deal?
It's
kind of
direct
SPV?
investment in each deal.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm curious, how does Cowboy Partners get compensated along the ride? Because typically for a shorter term hold or merchant, the profit or the back end is at that point when it's sold. So if you're not selling, how have you guys
participation in the cash flow?
Okay, that's great.
It's nothing too novel about our structure. You've seen it before. It's a pref and promote structure.
Yeah.
You know, we have some hurdles that once we hit, we start to enjoy participation in the cash flow. And our investor partners are ecstatic when we start to participate in the cash flow because it means they've already hit a much higher hurdle. Right. And they're getting everything they bargained for plus more.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. And speaking of raising capital, that is for any private equity, TAC, anyone raising money, it's always challenging. How have you been successful in raising capital?
The easy description is to tell you it's a small group of high net worth individuals who are serial investors. And by small, I don't mean 3 or 4. I mean 15 or 20.
Okay.
But that wouldn't tell the whole story because in our portfolio, there is capital of every type. There's insurance company investment. There's institutional investment. There's a lot of family partnership and trust fund investment. What we do is a marvelous vehicle for, the fancy term is intergenerational transfer of wealth, right? It's a marvelous vehicle for that. And so we have a lot of estates in, through the various structures they use investing in our transactions. It's not, there's not a single, there's not an easy button, right? Just hit that and we go. It's, there's a wide variety. Oftentimes our development structures, our capital stack includes land equity from a landowner who's anxious to avoid capital gains tax by staying in the transaction with us, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing novel about that, but it works.
Yeah.
It's a marvelous way to get kickstart a project.
And how do you think about, you mentioned insurance company. It sounds like most of your capital has been more in the high net worth family office space.
Yeah.
What makes you want to go that route versus say, hey, I'm going to call up a Bridge Investment Group or a JP or some more private equity institutional partner? Is there any opposition to that, or has it just worked one way versus the other for you in terms of sources of capital?
Don't misunderstand this. I'm not a control freak, but I am a control freak.
Sure.
And we don't like sharing control of the assets.
Yeah.
I don't want the institution to tell me when it's time to sell. As you know, a fund will have a fixed horizon generally. And what if that horizon is reached at a time when the market's stinky? Mm-hmm. That doesn't work so well. Right? So we have we have really structured our transactions with the idea that we want to rely on ourselves, on our own judgment. And I know that sounds very sort of cocky, sort of arrogant, doesn't it? I don't mean it that way.
Right.
That's
no.
not that. It's in fact that's by and large that's what drove the decision to be development focused as opposed to be acquisition focused. Right. We've been in these assets for a long time. I don't want to live with somebody else's mistakes.
Yeah.
We're going to try. We're going to do it the way we want to do it relative to our objective of a long-term hold. And that doesn't mean we think we're the only ones who do it right. That's not what I mean by that. But we like being close to those decisions. We like influencing the mix of units. We like all those things that a developer gets to decide that a buyer doesn't get to decide.
Yeah, really good points. And that answers another question I had is the decision to develop versus acquire.
Yeah.
But you kind of answered it there, is control throughout the process.
And it doesn't mean that we won't acquire something. We have and we will based on opportunity, but it's not the reason we're in business. That acquisition is not the reason we're in business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious how you're sourcing, well, I guess high level, what is your portfolio, what have you been able to accomplish over the last 23 years, Dan? I mean, project count, units roughly over the last little bit for Cowboy?
The portfolio today is 3,000-ish units.
Yeah.
All with a long-term hold. In the last 23 years, I think we've sold 3 times.
Wow.
Maybe 4.
Yeah.
It's a very small handful of properties that we have sold. And we intend to continue that path for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I love it. And what has been the most successful way to source new opportunities? You hear, groups that focus purely off market with owners of land or work with their broker relationships or other ways. But what's worked for you guys?
All the above.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have a fixed specific model. We're fortunate. We've been here for a while. Mm-hmm. Even when Cowboy Partners was new 23 years ago, I had been here for a while.
Sure.
Others in our company had been here for a while. And so we got to see deals early on usually. Not all of them, but enough that we found all the opportunity we ever needed. I mean, our biggest challenge was knowing what not to do. I've said this so many times that the people that work with me are sick of hearing it, but the best deals I ever did are the ones I didn't do, right? Knowing which ones to do and which ones not to do was our biggest challenge. Yeah. And that's not that's not a pat on the back. It's, we've been around, we've had pretty good success, so it's kind of typical, right? That the deals are going to find their way to us. Yeah,
love it. And you mentioned your early days with Prowswood, you were able to kind of graduate into a partnership role. Yeah. One thing that we've thought about in our business, and I'm always curious how others do it, is to how do you incentivize hardworking, aspiring employees in terms of making sure they feel like they're part of the business plan or the pie, or incentivizing them with some sort of ownership and balancing that with, you as a founder.
On the development side of the company, again, we didn't discover this. The world's done this for a long time, right? But it's participation in the deals. That's what makes a bright, energetic young person want to be a part of our team. I'd love to think it's because of the culture we have at Cowboy Partners. Well, that's a reason they don't leave, but the reason they'll come is because we're offering participation in the deals.
Yep.
Right? That's it. You're not in development for a salary.
No.
Right? I mean, okay, there are people in development for a salary. I get it. I understand. It's the institutional world, particularly.
Yep.
Right? But I don't think people say, yeah, I'm going to go get a master's in real estate development because I want that salaried job. Right? I think it's because they want to take their shot at it.
Yep.
And I think I think our proposition and that of the other much, much larger, much more significant organizations that have been doing it for a long time, I think the proposition is come with us and we'll provide you the resources you need to do what you want to do, and we'll share the upside with you.
Yeah, I love it. Makes perfect sense. Shifting a little bit, we'll wrap up here with the last few questions here, Dan, but you've had monetary success in your life, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, that's a driver, right? Is not just the salary, but the potential upside.
Yeah.
Now that you've been through that, I guess what role does money play in your life now? I mean, how do you think about that as someone who's now kind of on the other side of that success?
It's an interesting question. My father, who is a huge influence on me in a lot of ways, was maybe the least materialistic person I've ever met. And I'm not sure if that's really because he was just completely devoid of any materialism. It didn't matter to him. Or if it was because he suppressed it so that he could devote himself to providing for his family. Right? I mean, his motive to earn money was to provide for his family. That's all it was. There was nothing for him. He couldn't have cared less what he wore, what he drove. It just, right? But pretty powerful lesson in that, right? That resources, and it's not just money, but it's other resources that accumulate over time, relationships and networks and an operating company, resources that allow you to provide opportunity for others, whether that's affordable housing, whether that's a great job that rewards them fairly for what they're doing, whether that's making a contribution in the community in whatever form, there's 100 forms that might take. It's all pretty rewarding stuff, right? Especially when you get to be an old guy, right? It's really hard to look at a 30-year-old who is gung-ho about the development business and tell him, yeah, let's go do this because it's going to make you feel really good.
Sure.
Right? But that's a part of what we do. We try and build that into the culture. I think that's, and that's not an altruistic, that's not a, see, aren't we good? It's really a selfish thing. Affordable housing, for example, is one of the most selfish things we do, right? We've found a way to make a living doing it, and we get all of those rewards from seeing the examples of people's lives who are changed by virtue of having housing. I had an experience many, many years ago with a community where I saw dozens and dozens of little kids out playing in this affordable housing community we had built. And I had this wave rush over me. Oh my goodness. If we hadn't done this, where would those kids be? Right? It's like, how can you turn down those kind of opportunities? Right? So yes, we're interested in financial success, but at this point in my career, it's really more about what that facilitates than it is what it buys. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a great answer. Yeah, I love that, Dan. It's kind of full circle and having that realization. Last couple questions. What advice would you give your younger self? I mean, not that you might change anything, but I guess from a entrepreneurship or real estate, or just kind of, you're 21, what would you maybe do or change or give advice to yourself in your role now?
Well, the way I reflect on that question is, okay, what's worked for me? What would I want me to know? This is what's worked, and do it again. There's a very, I won't call it famous, but it's a current popular quote from Matthew McConaughey. Do you know where I'm going with this? Do you know what he said?
I don't. I do like Matthew McConaughey, but I don't know this quote.
He was explaining to his dad that he was leaving college to go become an actor. And he was expecting his dad to just freak out, right? Just,
sure.
What are you doing? And his dad says to him, after some moments of chin rubbing and reflection, his dad looks him right in the eye and says to him, well, if that's what you're going to do, don't half-ass it. Right?
Yeah,
It was, all right, if that's what you're going to do, be the best at it. And I mentioned earlier, my father had been a big influence on me. That was the message of his life. And it gets expressed as, well, I don't care what you're going to do, just be the best at it. That he wasn't really saying, in a competitive sense, be better than others at it. He was saying, be the best you can be at it. Commit yourself to it. And I've learned that lesson in a bunch of different places. I learned that lesson from my wife, Dina. It was 1,000 examples of selflessness and how she pours herself into something to make sure it's just right. And we express that at Cowboy with the phrase, good enough isn't. And that idea of sometimes it's really hard to distinguish the rewards from doing that come from doing that last 10 or 20%, that really distinguish. It's really hard sometimes. Well, wait a minute, guys who aren't working nearly so hard are making a lot of money. Why am I going to do this last 10 or 20%? But I'm personally convinced that to the degree Cowboy has durability and has a long runway ahead of it, it's in large part because of that, because we live by that notion that good enough isn't. We owe it to everybody involved to do the very best we can.
Yeah, love that. It's such a good answer, Dan. And my last question, and I typically ask this to all my guests, is when you think about life holistically, how you will measure yourself, or I guess in success, how do you define success in your life?
Wow.
It's a heavy question.
Yeah. Really. And certainly it's different today than it was 35 years ago.
Yeah.
There were different pressures, different anxieties you feel, things you want to accomplish. But I think what I mentioned a few minutes ago, I don't have a scorecard anymore. That's not, but the opportunity to impact people's lives in a constructive way. And again, that's not like, see, aren't we good guys? That's not what I mean by that. I mean, no, really, because you got to understand, this is the coolest thing you can do, right? You won't find anything more fun than doing this, right? So that's a large part of what drives our passion about affordable housing. And everybody in the company, I mean, the property management team, everybody gets it. It's like, thanks. I get thanked for the opportunity to be a part of an affordable housing effort. People say, we're making a difference. How cool is that your employees realize that they're making a difference and they're grateful for the opportunity to be a part of that? That's pretty rewarding, right?
It is, absolutely.
I mean, I can't drive it. I can't impress anybody with it. I can't live in it, but I don't know. Is there a better reward than that?
I don't think so. Well, there's no better way to end, Dan, and this has certainly been impactful for me, and it'll be impactful for those who listen. And like, seriously, thank you for taking the time.
You flatter me to invite me down and listen to what I might want to say.
It's great. Yeah, I love it. Thanks again, Dan.
Okay.